This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Japan's Prime Minister says he will have frank discussions with US President-elect Donald Trump. Shigeru Ishiba also announcing plans for constructive ties with China in his first policy address. Now, a veteran Chinese journalist is going to prison for spying. Dong Yuyu has been detained since 2022 and has just been handed a 7-year sentence. Singapore Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong wraps up his China visit, urging nations to look beyond the immediate ups and downs of US politics and focus on long-term problem solving. And North Korea is hosting the Russian defense minister, who hails their expanded ties and deeper security alignment as Pyongyang promises complete support and solidarity with Moscow's army and people. And Taiwan raises its economic forecast, brushing aside concerns of trade disruption from Donald Trump's proposed higher tariffs. Ahead on East Asia tonight, Chinese authorities say they will take required measures to prevent a repeat of the 3 mass attacks that took place earlier this month. We take a deep dive on what this entails. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says he will have frank discussions with US President-elect Donald Trump, and he will propose the joint use of American bases and military facilities with Japan's self-defense forces. Now, Mr. Ishiba made the comments during his first policy speech in Parliament today.
率直に意見を交わし、両国の国益を相乗的に高め合うことで、自由で開かれたインド太平洋の実現にすることができると考えます。トランプ次期大統領とも率直に議論を行い、同盟をさらなる高みに引き上げていきたいと考えております。
He said that while the US and Japan have their own national interests, their alliance remains the cornerstone of Japan's foreign and security policies. Mr. Ishiba also wants constructive relations with China, even as he said Beijing's military activities are increasing. The Japanese leader said that the two countries have their differences, but Tokyo will assert itself and cooperate with Beijing at the same time because China's stable development benefits the entire region, Mr. Ishiba had said.
我が国としての、そして同盟に基づく抑止力、対処力を維持・強化しつつ、各国との対話を重ね、我が国にとって望ましい安全保障環境を作り出すことであります。これにより、分断と対立を乗り越え、法の支配に基づく国際秩序を断固として堅持をいたしてまいります。
And for more, we are joined now by Tomohiko Taniguchi. He is a special advisor at the Fujitsu Future Studies Center and a specially appointed professor at the University of Tsukuba. Well, warm welcome, Professor Taniguchi. First up, I know you have been listening intently to PM Ishiba's speech. What are some of the key takeaways?
One of the key takeaways is the absence of his signature policies, including his proposal for launching Asia's version of NATO. He proposed that idea before, but he said nothing of that. What's interesting is that he hinted that there may be bumpy roads ahead between him and the president-elect or president of the United States, Donald Trump, because he said in his speech that it is also the United States that derives significant strategic benefits from the presence of U.S. military facilities that Japan hosts. So it's almost as if saying that you are also the beneficiary of the U.S.-Japan alliance relationship. It's not only Japan that is the recipient of the benefits. So it's an interesting reference to the U.S.-Japan security relationship.
And Professor, just picking up on what you said earlier about Prime Minister Ishiba, he left out some of his signature policies. Why do you think that's the case?
Most frankly, the idea of launching Asia's version of NATO is very much premature and immature, both from within Japan and from without. Very few support he has gotten from his proposal, which I think is the reason why.
Right. And given that Prime Minister Ishiba, he's been talking a fair bit about, trying to cooperate with the opposition. I'm wondering to what extent do you think that's going to help the government push through all that extra budget that he's trying, to bring in to boost Japan's stagnant economy?
Well, it's inevitable for the ruling coalition that's lost majority to cooperate as much as possible with moderate elements of the opposition. And so it's going to be a challenging couple months for Mr. Ishiba, first, to pass important budgetary proposal, second, to show both to his fellow parliamentarians within his party and across the aisle that he has actually a prime ministerial timber. And he has to gain support from the public because in July next year, Japan is going to have another round of important elections, this time for the upper house.
Now, on foreign policy, Prime Minister Ishiba has made recent overtures to ease tensions with China through diplomatic channels. And notably, he held talks with President Xi on the sidelines of the APEC summit. Now, looking ahead, what are the prospects for China-Japan relations when Donald Trump returns to the Oval Office? Well, we spoke to Makio Miyagawa, a former special advisor to Japan's National Security Secretariat, and let's listen in.
When Mr. Trump becomes the president early next year, he will take a very unconciliatory policy vis-à-vis China. This would, in a way, help us to improve relations with China. Well, China would like to improve relations with Japan, so as not to create two problems at the same time. So this would provide maybe an opportunity for Japan-China relations.
Now, Professor Taniguchi, let's bring you in here. As a seasoned expert on Japan's foreign policy and economy, do you share some of that optimism as Mr. Miyagawa that China-Japan relations could improve under a Trump 2.0?
I think that's an established and observable pattern that you can see when the China-Japan, when the Sino-U.S. relationship is in very much bad condition. Conventional wisdom holds that Sino-Japanese relationship tends to go upward. That being said, the Chinese diplomats and Xi Jinping himself are very much astute in detecting what's going on in the target country, this time Japan, how strong the leader is. And the challenge for Mr. Ishiba is he does not seem to be, he does not appear to be a strong leader as of now. So he must gain strength himself in order for him to strike a better balance as he wishes with Xi Jinping. The challenge, again, Xi Jinping does not have anything like election calendar. You have your own, the United States has its own, Japan has its own in an ample supply, but Xi Jinping does not have to pay any attention to political election calendar of that sort. So he is looking at Mr. Ishiba with interest, but he also knows that Mr. Ishiba so far has remained not strong.
Right. And obviously, Prime Minister Ishiba is also, trying to take the U.S.-Japan alliance to new heights, as what he has mentioned. But how do you assess Prime Minister Ishiba's position with the U.S.? Because, I mean, he's certainly quite different from Abe, who's known as a Trump whisperer.
For Mr. Trump, what sort of relationship he should have with Mr. Ishiba is not primary, but secondary, because there have been few problems between the United States and Japan, and Mr. Trump knows very well Mr. Ishiba is not Mr. Shinzo Abe, whom Mr. Trump held dear. So Mr. Trump is going to take much more time to really see if Mr. Ishiba is someone that he would be willing to closely work with.
Right. In the meantime, when it comes to balancing this U.S.-China relations, how do you think Prime Minister Ishiba is going to navigate this interplay, between Japan's economic ties with China and its security alliance with the U.S.? I'm just wondering what sort of nuanced approaches do you think he would adopt to maintain this stable balance?
If you read between the lines of today's speech, he started his policy speech by mentioning the need to pay more to the members of the Japanese armed forces. That's the sort of messages that the members of the armed forces have long wanted to hear from the Japanese leader. So its implication is very much clear. Japan is ready to beef up its security provision and military preparedness. So that message should be well taken by both the United States and China. So peace through strength may be a mantra for Mr. Trump, but it must be the same for Japan, given the proximity to this gigantic neighbor.
It's always good speaking to you. I'm going to leave you to enjoy the rest of your Friday evening. Tomohiko Taniguchi, Senior Advisor at the Fujitsu Future Study Center and specially appointed professor at the University of Tsukuba. In other news, a court in China has sentenced veteran Chinese state media journalist Dong Yuyu to 7 years in prison for espionage. That's according to a family member. Well, his sentencing comes months after an Australian writer and pro-democracy blogger was handed a suspended death sentence on spying charges. There was heavy police presence reported outside the court in Beijing, where the hearing was happening, with journalists asked to leave the area. The U.S. National Press Club said the former Guangming Daily editor was detained by Beijing police 2 years ago and charged with spying. The 62-year-old has been held in a prison in Beijing following a closed court hearing last year, awaiting the verdict. Multiple non-governmental organizations advocating for press freedom have called for his release. Now, an online petition also collected more than 700 signatures from journalists, academics, and NGO workers. Well, Dong was the deputy editor of the commentary section in the Communist Party-affiliated Guangming Daily. Well, his articles advocated moderate reforms while avoiding direct criticism of Chinese President Xi Jinping. The former editor also regularly held in-person exchanges with foreign diplomats from various embassies and journalists. Now, China's latest decision to place a top military official under corruption investigation has once again sent the rumor mill into overdrive about the world's largest armed forces. Analysts say that the latest development suggests that President Xi Jinping's anti-graft campaign in the military is far from over. Well, CNA's Tan Si-hui has more.
Admiral Miao Hua, the latest military chief to be ensnared in China's anti-corruption storm. He sat on the 5-member Central Military Commission, the country's highest-level military command body.
Miao Hua is a senior PLA officer. He has extensive experience. He's largely known to be part of the PLA Navy and associated with political work within the PLA Navy.
He's kind of like in an ambassadorial symbolic role, in the sense that he's in charge of international political affairs, where he travels to meet with his counterparts overseas. One of the sort of favorite pictures of him is in the international media is him stepping off a plane to meet his counterparts in Southeast Asia. So in that sense, he's much more of a political affairs individual than, say, in a combat role.
Analysts say the 69-year-old suspension raised eyebrows, also because of the Navy's role in China's defense in the East China Sea. Defense Ministry spokesman Wu Qian told a news conference on Thursday that the Communist Party's Central Committee had decided after research to suspend Miao from his position.
中央军委委员、军委政治工作部上将主任苗华涉嫌 严重违纪。
And it was at the same news conference Mr. Wu refuted reports that Defense Minister Dong Yuyu is under investigation for corruption, calling such reports pure fabrications. Mr. Dong Yuyu, a former Navy commander, has been in the job for less than a year. Rumors about him under probe caused a big stir. That's because his predecessors Wei Fenghe and Li Shangfu were removed in quick succession under corruption charges. Now, the series of events raised questions about the stability of China's national defense system. China's far-reaching anti-graft campaign has extended to its military in recent years, even as President Xi Jinping, who is also chairman of the Central Military Commission, mandated the military to achieve world-class standards by 2027, when the PLA marks its 100th anniversary. As part of the modernization drive, China's defense budget has more than doubled over the last decade to about $230 billion, with the percentage rise in military spending consistently outpacing the annual domestic economic growth target. Analysts say the latest developments suggest that the ongoing purging of the military has not yet reached an endpoint.
And perhaps it would mean that any engagement with the military at a working level is perhaps not very useful. You have to go to the guy at the top because he calls all the shots. For the United States, at least for right now, and others, while they are competing with the PRC, there is little desire for unintended escalation, right? For things to get out of control. So the effort to try to manage that relationship, that increasingly difficult relationship, is in part dependent on understanding what the other side wants to do, how the other side functions. That reduces some of the space for miscalculation.
All eyes will be on the next meeting of the Politburo, the highest political organ of China's Central Committee, which typically meets once a month. It's where senior level personnel changes are likely to be discussed. Tan Su-Hui, CNA, Beijing.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, businesses are rushing to hoard Chinese goods under the threat of higher Trump tariffs, push record cargo flights out of the Asian nation. Plus, South Korea's top carrier Korean Air wins the European Commission's approval to team up with Asiana Airlines following years of negotiations. You're watching East Asia tonight right here on CNA. It is time now to get you up to speed in business with Olivia Mazuki. So, Olivia, I believe you've got an update for us on Taiwan's economic outlook. And do we see any bearing of the looming Trump tariffs?
Well, I'll tell you, it's quite the contrary because the trade-reliant economy is now looking to expand at a faster pace than previously thought. Taiwan has raised its economic growth forecast for this year and the next, even as the world braces for more trade disruption from Donald Trump's promises to impose stiff new tariffs on its biggest trading partners. According to an estimate released by the Statistics Bureau in Taipei, for 2024, the GDP is expected to grow 4.27%, higher than the earlier projection of 3.9%. And for next year, the economy is seen to expand 3.29%. That compares with the previous estimate of 3.26%. And Taiwan has been one of the best performing economies in Asia this year, driven by global demand for its AI-related high-tech products. That performance has allowed the central bank to keep its benchmark interest rates at the highest level in 16 years. It has also showed the government to roll out a range of curbs to cool down a red-hot property market. But the looming higher U.S. tariffs on China may complicate the economic outlook for Taiwan. Analysts have warned economic hit to Taiwan from new levies could be more severe than to Japan or South Korea, given its heightened exposure to the two superpowers. And Chinese EV makers are hitting roadblocks in Europe as the tariff tussle continues. Shares of deliveries for the likes of SAIC Motor and BYD to the European market slipped to 8.2% in October in the run-up to the new tariffs. That is down from 8.5% in September. It also marks the fourth month that market share has dropped below year-ago levels. Now, the slowdown follows the EU's imposition of tariffs of up to 45% on Chinese-made EVs, which came into effect on October 30th. Despite the challenges, BYD is ramping up its European presence, doubling October sales to over 4,600 vehicles. The company is also overtaking rivals like MG, which saw its October deliveries plunge by 56%. Meanwhile, broader tensions between China and Europe are affecting the industry. As trade talks continue with little progress, the future of Chinese EVs in Europe remains in limbo. Adding to the uncertainty, EV demand in Europe has weakened overall, partly due to reduced government subsidies in major markets like Germany. HSBC is reportedly pulling back from its credit card business in China 8 years after its launch, following failed attempts for its sale. The lender has struggled to expand and make the enterprise profitable in the world's second biggest economy. According to Reuters, HSBC has stopped issuing new cards and is now working towards winding down the service offered to a large part of China onshore customers. The bank, however, may keep servicing credit cards for a small segment of so-called high-end clients. And this marks a reversal to HSBC's ambition to rapidly grow its China business in 2016 as part of its Asia pivot. The bank issued as many as 800 million cards in 2021, but growth stalled and transactions plunged due to China's zero-COVID policy. Since then, Chinese consumers have tightened their spending in a slowing economy, shrinking the credit card market further. China is the only market globally where HSBC's wealth and personal banking business is not yet profitable. The unit reported $46 million in loss in the first half of this year. And global businesses are racing to get ahead of the proposed Trump tariffs. They are beginning to stockpile, shift supply chains, rework contracts, and take other steps to guard against the possible impact. The race to secure goods from China in particular is boosting international cargo flights out of the Asian nation, with the numbers hitting new records in the weeks since Donald Trump won the U.S. election. There were 3,485 international cargo flights in and out of China last week, the most since March 2023, which is just after China reopened its borders from several years of pandemic restrictions. And that was also the third straight week with more than 3,400 flights, according to an official data. Market watchers say China's robust export engine is expected to pump out a new record this year, and the country is already in the midst of an export boom and is expected to get a further push from a wave of American clients rushing to hoard Chinese goods. In the year through October, the number of freight flights rose 73% compared to the same period in 2023. There was more than 8% gain in the number of ships moving goods in and out of China, while truck and train transport also saw double-digit increases. Meantime, air cargo prices out of China have not spiked just yet. It remains unclear when new tariffs will hit China and how high they will ultimately be. But regardless of how policy shakes out, the threats are already having economic consequences. Korean Air shares managed to recover from a sharp fall today, while Asiana Airlines losses deepened at the closing bell. So that's a bit of a diverging picture there. That's after the EU approved of a merger of the two carriers. So South Korea's top two airlines are set to complete their merger by the end of this year. That's in a deal that's been valued at well over $1 billion. After the merger, Korean Air is expected to run Asiana Airlines as a subsidiary for 2 years before streamlining the two entities. The merged entity will have more than 200 aircraft and will reportedly rank as the 7th largest carrier by passenger load. The deal has gained the approval of 13 out of 14 countries, and U.S. approval is expected to go pretty smoothly. And that's as industry experts say, normally American authorities would have launched legal action by now had they have any concerns. Now, the EU had expressed concerns earlier that the merger would hurt competition on routes between South Korea and Europe. So in order to address this, Korean Air took steps such as moving its European routes to other airlines. Asiana Air also sold its freight business about a year ago. That's a roundup in business for you, Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Olivia. Well, we're going to go for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Singapore's Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong speaks to the media at the end of a 6-day visit to China. He says countries shouldn't be swayed by immediate swings in U.S. politics. You're watching East Asia tonight. Japan's Prime Minister says he will have frank discussions with U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. Shigeru Ishiba also announcing plans for constructive ties with China in his first policy address. Singapore's Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong wraps up his China visit, urging nations to look beyond the immediate ups and downs of U.S. politics and focus on long-term problem solving. And a veteran Chinese journalist is going to prison for spying. Dong Yuyu has been detained since 2022 and has just been handed a 7-year sentence. This month alone, 3 mass attacks took place in China, resulting in dozens of casualties. Well, authorities have said that they will take measures, including strengthening the use of big data to prevent potential risks. Now, are these measures enough to tackle the underlying issue? Well, before we take a deep dive into it, CNA's Lauren Ong takes us through the recent incidents that rattled China.
Desperate cries for help by young students on the morning of November 19th in front of a school in central Hunan province when a small white SUV rammed through, injuring several people. About a week earlier, a man drove into a crowd at a sports center in the southern city of Zhuhai, killing 35 and injuring some 40 others. The 2 incidents add to a growing list of mass attacks in China this year. At least 8 incidents have taken place so far in 2024, sparking widespread attention and concern.
因为你难以察觉随性而起的报复性社会行为。
This video condemning so-called vicious incidents was shared more than 1,400 times on WeChat's short video sharing platform, with the content creator blaming unemployment as one of the factors contributing to the growing crimes. Another video giving tips on what to do during a knife or car attack was circulated over 10,000 times on the same platform.
有汽车冲过来，要朝汽车两侧后方跑。
This opinion piece by Shanghai-based media outlet Guancha.cn questioned why responses to such incidents are always half a beat slower, calling for more efforts in prevention rather than reaction. It's been circulated some 200,000 times on Chinese social media Weibo, with comments on the platform echoing these calls. Some emphasize the need to help people who experience injustice resolve their issues, while others urged everyone to stay strong during this period of economic downturn and social tensions. Local authorities have since vowed to double down on risk prevention efforts, following directives from President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang. For example, officials in Zhuhai are reinforcing patrols and checks in densely populated areas and urge for a thorough analysis of what they called new challenges brought by changes in the social structure. Lauren Ong, CNA, Beijing.
So how can China, or other countries in Asia for that matter, prevent mass attack incidents such as those in Zhuhai and Wuxi? Well, for more, we are joined now by CNA's Tan Yuguan from Shanghai. Now, Yuguan, horrifying incidents. I know you've been tracking the reactions on the ground and on social media. What has been the general sentiment in China about these incidents?
Well, many netizens on Chinese social media have expressed shock at the incidents. They've also called for severe punishment. In fact, some are even openly calling for the death penalty for these assailants. Now, many feel that for personal disputes to result in so many deaths and casualties, and that is just plain insanity. Now, if you recall, assailants in the Zhuhai or in the Wuxi incident, for example, has personal disputes prior to carrying out their attacks. the Zhuhai attacker, for example, was unhappy with his divorce settlement, while the Wuxi attacker was unhappy about his internship pay. And he was also unhappy about the fact that he could not graduate from technical college. Now, the reasons of these personal disputes that have driven these assailants to do what they did have caused some netizens to call for a deeper examination of what drove these assailants to the extremes. Kelly?
Now, Yuguan, speaking of what could be driving these attackers, are you able to tell us if there are any obvious general stresses?
Well, obviously, it's open secret that the economy has been slowing of late. Unemployment numbers are higher than what they were many years ago, and therefore, when times are bad, purse strings are tight. In general, it's less easy to gloss over things, and therefore, stress levels would go up. It's quite interesting to note that after the Zhuhai incidents, the Chinese leaders actually called for local governments to ensure to prevent further risk of such incidents from happening. They even called for local authorities to ensure social stability. Now, in that matter, some lawyers have come out on social media to say that really goes to tell you how important it is to have a robust and accessible legal system for the public to seek just resolution for their personal grievances. That said, members of the public that we have spoken to say that really, grievances and all these stresses are a fact of life, and it's really how we deal and resolve these stresses that really truly matter.
大多数的情况都是自己想办法要减压的，因为有的时候现在看那个网络也很那个的，就是看看网络上自己也会自己调节一下的，因为有的时候要有阿 Q 精神，要往好的地方想，因为困难的事情其实人人都会碰到的，就是碰到问题以后要感觉就是你办法总比困难多嘛。
当遇到压力也好，遇到生活中的压力也好，我就会通过一些其他的方式去排解自己的压力，要学会去让自己变得更健康。当然，如果有一些你觉得自己没有办法去应对的时候，我觉得就应该积极点去看医生，或者去寻求一些外界的帮助。我觉得自己的心态就很重要。当你觉得自己承受不了的时候，你就得学会去寻求第三方的帮助。
在那个压力这么大的情况下面，感觉周围其实抑郁啊或者不开心的人其实挺多的，但是好像可能我周围朋友可能还好，他们自己都有自己的疏解方法。那就算是可能有抑郁症的朋友，他也知道可以及时去治疗，所以也还好。但是我相信肯定有很多他们是得不到，而且我听说，比如说上海的卫生精神那个中心连预约都很难预约，我听说，所以就是对，那肯定远远是不够的，肯定是。
So, Yuguan, it's interesting to point out that two of them there mentioned the need to know how to find help from third party in times of stress. What is the state of mental health support in China versus other countries?
Well, the state of mental health support in China has improved quite a bit in recent years. In Shanghai, for example, it's not very, very hard to find, talks about building mental resilience or mental health awareness. That said, Shanghai is a very different place compared to the rest of China. It is a lot more cosmopolitan and also more advanced in its thinking. Statistically, the rest of China doesn't do very well in terms of mental health support. According to a 2022 report by Asia Society, that's a US NGO based with a global presence, it says that, mental health support is only available to 22 people per million. Now, that's compared to about 1,000 per million in the United States. So 22 and 1,000 per million, both are not great statistics, but it does show the kind of huge gap China has to catch up with more advanced countries as far as, mental health support is concerned. That said, the family structure in China is still very much intact, even for those people who leave their hometowns to work in cities like Shanghai. They do keep in contact with their families by various means, to keep and use that as a source of mental solace. However, of course, that is not always available for everyone. Oteli?
Yeah, 22 people to a million. That's quite a stark number. So, Yu Guan, you have spoken to a few mental health experts. Generally, what are their thoughts, on the recent spate of mass attacks?
Well, they agree that more can be done as far as mental health support is concerned, but as far as how to prevent similar extreme incidents like these attacks from happening again, they do have some differing views. Now, one expert thinks that high-risk groups should be identified and then mental health support targeted at these groups. However, another expert say numbers show that most of these attackers in these indiscriminate killings, they are not mentally ill, and therefore these attacks are related not to individual mental illness, but more to the case of is related to the general mental health of the general public.
Most offenders in these cases have been under great mental stress, which lead to impaired control of emotion and behavior, undermining their ability in decision-making and impulse control, although they have no history of mental illness. So in short, I think these unfortunate cases are not directly related to mental illness itself, but it is closely related to the mental health of the general public as a whole.
So far, with the recent spate of mass attack incidents, all the assailants were male. I'm curious to know if Dr. Chan weighed in on why that's the case.
Yes, he did. He did weigh in on this. He says that in traditional Chinese norms, for example, Chinese males are not encouraged to talk about their problems, and thinks that is actually a problem in itself.
Oriental males tend to suppress their emotions. 我们中国有一个老话，就是男儿流血不流泪. It's a Chinese proverb that as a man, you rather, shed your blood than shed your tears. So they tend to suppress their emotion and will very be reluctant to seek psychological or psychiatric help than females. And when their mental stress exceeded their ability to cope, they would just explode like an overblown balloon.
All things said, it is worth noting that there's gun control in China, and in some ways that has limited the number of casualties in most of these incidents. However, in the case of Zhuhai, it was a car that was used as a weapon, and that is indeed a worrying incident. Otelli?
Well, thanks very much for a deep dive into China's mass attacks. CNA's Tan Yu-guan reporting to us from Shanghai. South Korea says it scrambled fighter jets after 5 Chinese and 6 Russian military planes flew through its air defense zone. The development happening as Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belosov arrived in North Korea, where he hailed the expansion of ties with Pyongyang. Mr. Belosov was welcomed by his North Korean counterpart earlier today. Russian state media quotes him as saying that these talks will strengthen Moscow and Pyongyang's strategic military partnership. The two countries have deepened their relationship recently, with Moscow and Pyongyang ratifying a treaty earlier this month. The strategic partnership agreement calls for mutual military assistance in the event of an attack and cooperation against Western sanctions. Washington and Seoul already accused North Korea of sending more than 10,000 soldiers to help fight Russia's war in Ukraine. Well, across the border in South Korea, officials say they have the development of a new ballistic missile interceptor in an effort to bolster Seoul's defenses against missile threats from the north. The long-range surface-to-air missile, or LSAM, is designed to intercept incoming ballistic missiles or aircraft at altitudes above 40 kilometers during their terminal descent. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, K-pop band New Jeans leaves its label Adore after accusing parent company Hybe of workplace harassment. It's the latest in what's become the most prominent act of mutiny in an industry known for its tight image control. Singapore's senior minister Lee Hsien Loong says that countries should not be captured by the immediate ups and downs of what's happening in the US, but they should look beyond an administration's 4-year term to work out problems. Mr. Lee was speaking to the media at the end of a 6-day visit to China. This comes amid tense Sino-U.S. relations as President-elect Donald Trump threatened additional tariffs on Chinese goods earlier this week. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Olivia Song in Shanghai. So, Olivia, I know you've been working hard. You've followed the trip throughout. How did Mr. Lee describe this visit, his first as a senior minister?
I'll tell you, we do know that Mr. Lee is no stranger to China. As Prime Minister, he had visited the country 14 times. And this time round, having covered some of those trips when he was Prime Minister, I can tell you the schedule, even though he's handed over the leadership reins, has still been pretty packed. And so when he spoke to Singapore media today, I asked him what he thought the differences were at visiting this time round as senior minister. And he said that he thinks it's useful for him to keep visiting to get a feel of China's priorities and to see how Singapore can fit into those plans. And while he said that his successor, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, will be making his own visits to China in due course, he hopes to continue to keep visiting China. He also said that he hopes that Chinese leaders will be able to visit Singapore sometime soon as well. This also, he said, visiting is especially important for a country like China, which is big and complex, and being here on the ground gives him a better sense of what's happening, and it's because it's difficult to get a single general view of what's happening in the country. Also, he said another important thing is to keep up contacts with people that he's familiar with. Remember, we saw him sit down once again with Chinese President Xi Jinping, whom he has met many times as Prime Minister. But he also said he wanted to make contact with the next generation of Chinese leaders. And for example, we saw him meet Shanghai Party Secretary Chen Jining yesterday. They were meeting for the first time, but he did say that there were some differences this trip as senior minister. Have a listen.
The difference is that I'm not the PM, so the immediate issues which are being dealt with by the officials, by the ministries, and by the PM, I don't have to go and get involved in the details. I'm familiar with them, but I'm not dealing with them directly. I'm getting an impression, exchanging views, sharing perspectives, really trying to absorb their perspectives and to know how they see things and to get our own quick assessment of how things are in China.
Now, Mr. Lee also said that not being directly involved in these projects means that he's able to take a more long-term perspective, whether it comes to bilateral cooperation or in terms of international developments and how that affects how Singapore and China can work together. Another thing that he did say was that with deepening cooperation between Singapore and China, the work never ends. And he said that assisting the Prime Minister in this regard, he feels would be good for Singapore. I'll tell you.
Now, SM Lee's visit also comes amid tensions between China and the U.S. with, President-elect Trump. He was threatening additional 10% tariffs on Chinese imports. What exactly was SM Lee's take on where this bilateral relationship is headed?
I'll tell you, that was another question that was posed to the senior minister. We know that Singapore's foreign ministry did say that Chinese President Xi Jinping did brief SM Lee on its domestic and external priorities. And so Mr. Lee today during the briefing was asked about his sense of where China-US relations were headed moving forward. And he did say that China, like the rest of the world, is waiting to see what sort of actual policies the incoming Trump administration will enact. And even though there is a sense, though, of the basic contradictions and the rivalry that will continue to stand between these two superpowers. Have a listen. Mr. Lee emphasized the importance of Singapore-China ties amid a tense global landscape, particularly with rising U.S.-China rivalry under the incoming Trump administration. He stressed that Singapore aims to maintain good relations with all sides, including China. Besides having a big economy, China is Singapore's largest trading partner and is a key factor in Southeast Asia.
We need to work extra hard in order to maintain that link, because I think to lose that link is to lose something very valuable and important to us. And if you come to China, if you talk to their people, you will know they have technology, they have energy, they have a lot of ideas, they have a lot of talent. And if we want to make a success of Singapore, we should be able to work with them, certainly not to neglect them, and least of all, to be at odds with them, if at all possible.
SM Lee's visit to China came just 2 weeks after he visited the U.S. Mr. Lee said while American businesses aren't pessimistic about the U.S. economy, they are anxious about China-U.S. ties and what it means for their investments in China. Likewise, China is watching with concern because they want to maintain stability in Sino-U.S. relations. Mr. Lee stressed that both sides will have to deal with one another.
I think you should not be captured by the immediate ups and downs of what happens in the U.S. Because the ups and downs, you cannot not respond to them. But the interests, the concerns, the problems which need to be worked on, they extend, in many cases, way beyond one term of government. And therefore, if you want to solve them or work at them, and if you are able to look beyond 4 years as a horizon, you should try and do that.
Mr. Lee said Singapore is eager to cooperate with China, noting China's clear friendliness on both government and business fronts. He also expressed hope for future visits from Chinese leaders to Singapore.
Now, besides the geopolitical tensions that China is facing abroad, is also facing domestic challenges like slowing growth with its economy. And having met Singapore and Chinese companies, Mr. Lee said that they are well aware of the challenges that they face, but are finding their own way forward. And he does wrap up his visit there with hope that, this would do something for Singapore and Singaporeans moving forward. Back to you, Telly.
Well, thank you so very much. Olivia Seong reporting to us live from the stunning Bund in Shanghai. Looks like more trouble in South Korea's K-pop world. Famous girl group New Jeans is leaving their label Adore after accusing it of mistreatment and manipulation. Well, it's the latest development in a long-running conflict between the label's former CEO, Min Ee-jin, and executives of parent company Hybe. Well, Australian member Hanny says that the girls no longer want to continue working under a company which they believe has no intention of protecting their band. She had previously accused Hybe of workplace harassment at a South Korean assembly hearing. The conglomerate is credited with launching K-pop powerhouse BTS to superstardom. Adore released a statement on X saying that the band had insufficient grounds for termination and asserted their contract remains valid. It added that the label unsuccessfully requested meetings with New Jeans but expressed hope to resolve the dispute. Experts have warned that New Jeans' road to freedom may not be so smooth sailing. Reports estimate they may have to pay more than $200 million to terminate their contract. The quintet also acknowledged that they may not be able to use the name New Jeans or their branding moving forward. And that wraps up East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can also always look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for watching.